Welcome back to Closing Bell. Earlier this afternoon, the U.S. government filed its opposition to TikTok's request to delay its app ban. That filing remains under seal. Looking ahead, we await TikTok's response to that filing due tomorrow. And on Sunday, a judge is expected to decide whether or not to allow a ban from app stores. All this as Oracle and Walmart's proposal to take a stake in the Chinese-owned company is under review. Let's bring in former White House National Security Advisor and retired Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. General McMaster, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with TikTok because the U.S.'s CFIUS authority was expanded when you served as the National Security Advisor, and I'm wondering what you think about the proposed TikTok deal and whether you think a minority stake like this, a joint venture of sorts, can actually solve the national security concerns that are raised.
Well, Kayla, hey, it's great to be with you. Well, I think it's immensely important that we apply a great deal more scrutiny to Chinese companies and their penetration, not just into our markets, but their access to our data. And what we recognized early in the Trump administration is that, the assumptions on which our approach to China had been based are now really demonstrably false. And that is especially includes the idea that China and Chinese companies who have to act as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, would kind of play by the rules. And then over time, as China prospered, would liberalize and eventually even China might even liberalize its form of governance. Well, it's very clear now that the Chinese Communist Party is doing the opposite of that. And so it's very important for us to protect American citizens from the kind of penetration into our data space that can really result in vulnerabilities for us, vulnerabilities in terms of China gaining an unfair and predominant advantage in the emerging data economy, but really then weaponizing that data against us like they weaponize data against their own citizens.
That is true. Is there any transaction that would solve those concerns, or do you think an outright ban is the only safe way to proceed?
Well, that remains to be seen. So the minority stake I think it's just the beginning. Then we just have to see what protocols are going to be put in place to make sure that that data is protected. I think all of Americans these days, we ought to think about our data as gold and expect the companies that hold our data to be like Fort Knox. And so it's really important, I think, for the right assurances to be in place in terms of what data is kept, metadata, but then also individual data, and how it's secured. And what's really interesting, I think, and important for us to recognize is that when the Chinese Communist Party and its arms, like the Ministry of State Security and companies that it coerces to act as an extension of the party, they look at every company like it's a break-in. And they try to use software, hardware, services, infiltration of people to try to get into that company to extract data, but also sensitive technologies and intellectual property. So it's important that the source code is important, who controls the source code, how that source code is used. But I think there has to be, and I'm sure it's ongoing, a holistic assessment to understand better how we can protect Americans' data. Because, of course, it would be unrealistic for us to expect the Chinese Communist Party to treat our citizens better than they treat their own citizens.
Lieutenant General, I mean, using this TikTok example as part of a sort of broader big picture question, how much of a problem is it that this is the U.S., maybe with one or two other countries, against China rather than with the whole of Europe, for example, together? And as we look at the sort of broader battle against China, if the U.S. doesn't bring the likes of Europe along with it, is all of this challenge, all of this pushback from the U.S. side to China at risk of not really achieving a great deal?
Well, you put your finger on what is most important, right? What China does, and this is what I describe in Battlegrounds, they employ a strategy of co-option, coercion, and concealment. They co-opt us by the lure of their market, by the attractiveness of Chinese investment in other countries and so forth. And then once they're in, once you have that relationship, they coerce you to adhere to their worldview and to make compromises that you otherwise wouldn't make compromises on. And then they portray all of this as just normal business practices. So it's very, very important that the United States, the EU, and I would say Japan and others work together. And you know what, Wilfred, there's a lot more cooperation going on than meets the eye. If you think back to December 2018, I think it was about 12 countries joined together in indictments and sanctions on APT-10, which is the hacking organization of the Chinese Communist Party that is really behind the sustained campaign of industrial espionage really against all of us. So I think that there's more cooperation than meets the eye, but certainly everything that we do to confront the unfair practices of the Chinese Communist Party, economic practices as well as risks to our security, have to be done together.